Okay, today we're going to be painting a feather on black paper, a nice white feather. And the reason why I chose white is so that you can see your brush strokes, and it's helpful to learn how to paint feathers with the right tools and the right brushes and so forth. Now the black board that I'm using is a real smooth black board. It's by Derwent here. You can see the name here. It's Derwent. And it's a nice black tablet of paper that I use for painting everything in black. And I like it because it's not super heavy, but heavy enough so that the paper doesn't wrinkle up. And it's very, very smooth, so it's like a hot press. You could also, another paper that I really like that you could get in tablet form also is Strathmore Art Again. It's called Art Again, and it's a black paper tablet. So we're going to go over the brushes that we're going to be using, and I'm going to show you how to use them. So we're starting off with different types of, I call them grass brushes. Sometimes they have a name to them, sometimes they don't, but they look like a filbert, and they call them sometimes a grainer. They come in all different sizes. They come in flats also, but I don't like flats as much as the filbert because the filbert has the rounded tip, which makes it nice. This is a little angled one, which is kind of helpful too for angle strokes. And then we use liners, different types of liners, and then I have a round also that I'm going to be using. So to get you started with this, just to do a few little exercises, take an Oxcall because Oxcall makes your paint move smoothly across your paper. And we're going to do white gouache here. It's a Winsor & Newton permanent white. Take a nice fresh white. You want to use fresh white. And we're going to just try a few little strokes with these brushes. And I'm going to show you how you could actually create perfect feathers with them. So I get my brush a little bit damp, maybe even dip it in a little bit of the Oxcall, dip it in a little bit of your white gouache, and make some strokes on your paper like this. And you could see already it can look like a little feather here. Use a light touch because the heavier force that you put on a brush like this, if you're putting a heavy force, you're going to put more paint on your paper. And sometimes we do use that, but try to get used to doing a light touch. If you lift up your brush towards the tip of the end of the brush stroke here, you could get the fine little edges to your feathers. I use a larger filbert grass brush or grainer brush for larger feathers. Use the large ones like this. They have these nice small little, this is a 1/4 inch. They go by inches. So this one is like 1/2 inch, and this is half of that. It's a 1/4 inch here. And just dipping it in here, you could get fine little tiny strokes. By putting it into Oxcall, you could get smoother strokes and not as dry brush looking as just with water. So you could get nice little smooth strokes with that. And by turning and twisting your brush, you can make really nice flowy movements with it. And you could see the white is kind of getting more transparent. That's because I have a lot of Oxcall in it, or a lot of water in it. The least amount of water gives you more of pigment onto your paper. So sometimes we use the more transparent look. It depends on the feather. We're also going to be using little liner brushes, and the little liner brushes are for the little individual edges of the feathers. And you see as we paint our feathers when we use the little liner brush. So kind of practice with it and practice with how much force to put on the brush. If you hold your liner brush straight up, you're going to get little finer lines with it. If you hold it at an angle, you get little heavier lines. If you use more force on it, of course, you're going to get more wider lines. So kind of practice with it and practice with how much force you put on a brush. These are liners. This is a liner brush too, but sometimes I call it splaying out the brushes like this. You splay the brush out and you could get some kind of same effects as a grass brush, but I like the grass brush or grainer brush a little better because it covers more area. So that's pretty much a little practicing that you have to do, and you could see that you could get all those effects with this feather that we're going to paint. If you remember what I said about the transparency, when we get down to a quill right here where it's very, very transparent, we use a transparent wash, and when you put the paint on, you could see it disappearing and it becomes transparent, because this little part of the quill is always transparent. And then you put a heavier amount of paint up here where it's a little more opaque. Now that we've done our exercise here, I'm going to take some little small feathers and show you how you can just get some really nice effects and paint with these little feathers, and it'll give you a really idea of how to use this. So I just take a white Prismacolor pencil here again and just sketch this in. You could even just draw these in yourself. You could take a pencil and just do a little quill line and do a few little strokes like this to follow like this to practice. This makes really good practicing with the feathers here. And then we're going to show you how to stain the certain parts of the feathers here. We got the little fluffy part down in here. This is a cute little feather right here that we can do. Again, we mark where the quill is, make a straight line down, and then we have right here where, go right through the feather. You're not going to mess the feather up. And we get, you can see what our strokes are going to be. So we have the grass brush that we were painting with, and we're going to do our Oxcall. Make sure the Oxcall is in our palette, and make sure our white paint is still there. If not, just squirt some more white. This is permanent white, Winsor Newton permanent white gouache here. So we're going to just take this grass brush and do the movements here. If it feels a little dry, just take a little bit more Oxcall in it and put a little bit more Oxcall here. And we've got this little fluffy part here, which we just kind of make little fluffy movements with a brush here. So you could get some really nice effects in here. So this is getting used to the grass brush here. Get used to it. On this one, we're going to take our same brush, do movements. Here you can see how you could twist the brush and get really nice strokes with it. Remember, this has a little more Oxcall, so it's a little more solid here. You can see how by using the brush certain ways and by twisting and so forth, you could get really nice strokes with the brush here. So we have that in, and this is sort of semi-transparent too, so it's not, they're not super, because you could see the black paper underneath when you set the feather on it, so we don't have to make it really, really super opaque. So we're just going to put a little more Oxcall on it, like this, and you could see the white gouache, when it has enough water on it or Oxcall on it, it's more transparent. So to make it more opaque, we just add more white pigment to it. But we don't want it too opaque. So right now, then we're going to take a liner brush here. This is a 20/0 liner brush. It's a small liner brush. And we're going to just complete some of these little movements here and correct some of them like this here for detail. So we're going to get some of these here. These are layered. I could see that there's an under part here, so I'm going to do a little more opaque for the top part of the fluffiness here, right in here like this. And we could do nice little movements here. So on this particular feather, right here, these are smooth barbs coming here, but then they get real fluffy on the edges. So these, we have to make the little fluffy edges on them. So we just make little tiny, you see them right there, make little fluffy edges on them, and that's what makes that particular feather look a little more fluffier here. So just take your little liner brush and make little fluffy movements here on each little, and it only is on this little lower part here where it's the downy part of the feather. So see how it just makes this part look a little more fluffier. We'll get a little more in here, more in here. Now we're ready to, we'll put a little bit here too. We're ready to put the quill in. So the quill is very, very opaque, part of it, most of it, right here from the top down. Bring our quill. This is a small feather, so we don't have to really draw it in, but if you feel like you need to draw it in, just take a pencil and draw your quill in and then cover on top of it with the paint. So right in here, this lower part, remember you talked about the transparency? So we're going to take more Oxcall and not as much paint on your brush. And we're going to make this little part of the quill is going to be more transparent. We take that little part like this and make that transparent, and then this part up here is more opaque. So then we take more opaque paint, fill that in here with more opaque paint here like that. So, and then remember it has little growth. We have little growth patterns right here, and the little tip has a little more opaqueness to the little tip. So we just put a little more opaque on there. So now we're going to stain it. This has a kind of a light burnt sienna stain to it. So we're going to take our burnt sienna here. This is Van Dyke Brown. This is a Daniel Smith burnt sienna. Just going to put a little tiny bit on our palette here. And what you have to do is I'm going to take a round, a soft round, take a little wash of it right here. You can see this is the burnt sienna on here. We're just taking a little bit of watered down burnt sienna here, and then we're going to brush right over the feather like this. It gives a little bit of burnt sienna stain to it like this. Here's a little bit of burnt sienna on here. And then we have a little bit of lavender right in here. Our lavender is the Holbein lavender here that we use it for shadowing. And we're going to put the lavender in right in here where we see it more shadowed. Right here. A little more shadowed in here. And a little bit of the shadowing is coming through from the paper underneath. That's the nice thing about painting on the black paper and not making it completely opaque so that we could see the shadowing coming through from the other side of the paper here. I'm going to smooth some things out here, make it a little bit smoother. And also, if you want, we can make it a little tiny bit of Van Dyke Brown. This is a Van Dyke Brown watercolor by Winsor & Newton. Here, take a little tiny bit of that here, and that helps with shadowing also, right in here. Be careful with putting this on top of your white because you can mix it up and the white up with it and give it a pastel look. So just put it on quickly at one individual stroke. Here, this we're going to fix this up here. We're going to fix that up with a more opaque. It gives highlights on certain ones here. Right in here like this. We like to use Oxcall because the gouache is more granular and it's harder to paint on top of the gouache. Keep painting on top of the gouache because it's so granular and the brush doesn't move over it smooth enough. So you have to use the Oxcall, and the Oxcall makes it the brush move over the painted part easier. So we got a little bit of our highlights in, we got all that in. We could shadow this little area down by the, I'm going to mix with a little bit of lavender, with a little bit of the brown, and we could shadow this area right down here by the quill. Right in here needs to be shadowed. Right in there. And then I need to add a little more opaqueness in here. So that stands out a little more. This too, a little more opaqueness. You have to keep going back and forth until that quill stands out. So we put a little more opaqueness in there, which makes it nice. So this little up here mostly is almost finished. It also has those little barbs on the end of here, the little fluffiness too here, on here. So we put a few of those in to make it fluffy here, like this. Soft fluffiness. Here is very, very downy. There. And then we're going to put the quill in. So we got the quill is going to go right, it starts right there and it goes all the way down to here. This is going to be transparent here. It has a very tiny little quill, and then we're going to put very opaque on it like this. Oops, got a little bit of, when that happens, when you get a little bit too much paint on here, you're just going to take a little bit of your brush that's wet and kind of smooth it out like that. And then this has a very, very slight color to it also, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put a little bit of the burnt sienna on it here. When the burnt sienna first goes on, it gets real pink looking, but then it tones down after a while. We put a little bit of Van Dyke brown in it here, and then we're going to shadow right into it like this, and then we're going to take our liner brush and get some more little opaqueness in here, individual barbs in here. And this is where we can add, again, we can add the feathers that come in front. See how you can see all these feathers are coming over the other existing ones on the bottom. This is how we get layers. So this is a little more opaque. More opaque, with the bottom ones are a little more transparent. So the opaqueness ones have more light, and so it raises them up over the shadowed ones. So it looks like they're sitting on top, which is what it's doing here. So we get a lot of nice layers here, which helps it make it look a little more fluffier. The little tiny feathers are nice to do. We have a little tip there, little growth patterns. This is a very, very tiny little feather. So I'm going to show you just a little bit about shadowing. We could shadow this with a little bit of ivory black on here. The ivory black is blacker than the paper, so right here, so you see a shadows coming under here like this, under it like this, and then it going under here. The nice thing about shadowing, right here, is that you can make splits in the, like these are split here. You could bring the shadow in there and create those little areas where there's no feather here, no little barb to the feather. Right in here, you can also make some of your movements of the feathers a little bit finer here. You could correct things with the shadow, which is kind of nice too. Here, and you could see where the shadow's showing through here. Shadow in here, we have a little shadow by the quill here, and some of the little fluffiness in there, and little fluffiness out here. So it looks like it's sitting on top of the paper there. Get those shadow down in here. This little one is probably not going to have too much shadow in here. It has a little bit here and maybe just a little bit of shadowing right in here like this. Here it has a little split in there. It has a little slight bit of shadowing in there. So you could see how this makes the feathers stand out on the board here with the shadowing. And if you have a shadow that you want to soften, just take a little bit of water and wet it down, and it could be softened here, not as sharp. Say you take like right in here, say you put too much shadow in here, you could just come back and put your little barbs back in too. So it's not like you shadow and it's got to stay that way. Right in here, you could take a little feathers, make it a little feathery too. Okay.